Call to order the Wednesday, May 17th, Lower Suffolk Township work session. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic of the nation under God, indivisible, with liberty.
Item number 1 is the approval of the work session minutes from May 2nd, 2023 and April 19th, 2020. Do we have any edits, revisions, or modifications?
Then I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second. Moved and seconded, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Let's have it. See that? He's here in spirit. All right, next up, Mr. Jones.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just an update on some projects, the streetlight replacement program and convention list. There were a few fixtures that were outstanding in place. They're waiting for those to be delivered. In the interim, all the nodes for the lighting management system have been installed on the fixtures that have been currently installed. We don't need to wait for the rest of the 10 fixtures to move forward with that process. So looking at doing some training in early June for that. And hopefully the project will be completed sometime later this summer. Moving forward. The order.
Real quick on the light was the lights. I know you were looking at putting it at the football field. They were not in this kind. Where did that fall? Okay. Yeah. Okay. When does it? I know you were planning on that. What's the schedule on it?
Point, hopefully by sometime this year.
Okay.
This year, we'll have electric to the site and getting the lights installed.
Somebody just asked me. Thank you.
The Oliver Road and Park Avenue base contractor is mobilized. They started construction on Monday. Started the earth moving activities there. It's a 3-4 week project. It goes pretty quickly. Base repair contract, we originally were talking about doing it early last couple of weeks, but I'm looking at it further. One of the roads that we're going to be doing work on is Moyer Road right in front of the school. So just thought we better save that till after school is out.
Good
Just
plan.
make things a lot easier for everybody. Just an update on some grants. 2020 Go grant upgrade. That's full upgrade of 63 and 113 signal. Advanced working on the second submission to PennDOT. I expect to go out for bid in September this year. And with the procurement of all the equipment, it will probably be a spring of next year installation. Traffic signal technologies grant, working on traffic counts for the adaptive system. So submitted for the 2023 Green Light Go, which is like the phase 2 of the adaptive, which is all the other additional signal equipment that would optimize the system. Waiting to hear on that. And then we just submitted a scoping form for the Arley grant program to for the bike lanes, and waiting to hear on that one as well. We also got word last week that we were the recipient of a dirt and gravel low volume road grant for Dover Road. And this is the old 40-foot end of things to do some drainage improvements and roadway improvements. $225,000 grant that we'll be receiving for that work. The new facilities feasibility study had a kickoff meeting last week with all the stakeholders, so that went well. The consultants provided a project schedule, and we're looking at actually it's the November work session, first work session, which is actually the last day of October, but for them to do a presentation for the board, their concept plan and budget. The signal pole at 113 in Landis was just replaced. last week. That was one that was damaged by an accident. That's completed. And surprisingly, it only took 4 months to get a new master. Things are turning around as far as supply chain issues.
That we can save the paint this time.
Yeah. Department activities, met with Derek Dorica, who's doing the field usage study for grant fields. Gave a tour. All of our seasonal and summer helper report, began roadside mowing and meadow mowing this year. Installed electrical conduit. We're in the process of installing electrical conduit for the pathways at the community center. Working on base repairs for the Cape Seal roads. Okay, and the repairs and some other drainage improvements. Working on court resurfacing for the courts at Hooper Park. We'll do the colored surfacing and repairing the patches so the cracks. Getting that. And stormwater projects, Brandon Lane and Bergen Mill Road, we had a drainage issue there. Right at the intersection, water wasn't flowing, it's relatively flat, so we installed a French mattress under the road. And then a French drain down further to try to get the water to move away from the intersection there. And then we also replaced an 18-inch corrugated metal pipe on Old Morris Road. That's all that I have, except for the trees.
So, yeah, we got the email from the
Yeah.
woman, but I know you've been taking them down the hazard trees. You took some down Stover Road and Price Road and then leaving stumps from that standpoint. She obviously would like us to remove the stumps also from that standpoint.
Roots.
Well, I think the roots may go a little far, but the question comes down to, first of all, what is our legal responsibility? You know, even though it's right of way, it's not. That's always that hinky question of township property, or is it the trees or the responsibility of the property owner adjacent to them, which I think you're gonna talk to Andy about and get some better definitive answer on, right?
Yeah, and I also reached out to PSAC too, because I was looking through the second class township code to see whether or not. I know it's always been assumed, and I've assumed as well, that the property owners are responsible for the maintenance up to the curb or the edge of pavement. So I'd like to know where that is written in the second class township code, because just research, I couldn't find it. And then also ask them as well, so what's our obligation with, any trees, dead trees within the roadway? There is a section in the second class township code that deals with trees and shrubbery. And it basically states that we have to notify property owners if we're going to remove any tree within the right of way, anything that's 6-inch diameter or greater. And also that all the wood, the cordwood, the branch wood, any remnants of that tree are to be surrendered to and remain the property of the abutting owners.
And you remember that section was written when most people use firewood for heating their houses, so that was a valuable commodity, not something being left to be dealt with, which is the interesting thing on it. Yeah.
Read that, so infer that if we have to leave it because
It's there.
it's theirs, then it's their tree as well.
So, yeah, my only comment would be, and I think we need an answer to all that, since we've taken the step to take the trees down. I would be of the mindset that we complete the project and we stump grind the stumps also. I don't think you go back into the yard and take all the roots out. That's not a normal process
No.
with tree removal. But stump grinding or removing the stump is, in my opinion. So that would be my only feeling in this particular case. And along with, I know in other areas along Stowe Road and other things, at a certain point, those stumps have to go away. So that would be my take.
They are kind of plan on doing that at this location, just from an aesthetic standpoint. Just kind of fallen off the radar, and I was trying to get a machine with the stump grinder attached to it that we can just, because we've been taking down a number of trees ourselves, township property. A lot of them that are in open spaces or meadows that we mow that are problematic, that, we want to just make it easy as possible for ourselves. So trying to coordinate all that work in one fell swoop, just didn't get to it, but. So yeah, we can make arrangements to have that done, grind it, remove the grindings, we'll topsoil it and seed it and call it a day.
But I think roots that extend on the property, and that's beyond the normal scope of free root situation. That generally in agreement?
And you know, you actually answered my question. I was gonna say too, I know we have the open spaces, obviously the ash trees are coming down.
Yeah.
Is that something that we want to invest in, a stump removal or some process, but.
Well, actually, I'm looking to track look and looking at all the various attachments, and one of the attachments is the stump grinder, so I think we're.
Probably a good investment.
So I think These aren't going to go away.
And they're only gonna continue to.
It's gonna be more and more of an issue, and if we have the availability of the equipment to do it and quickly, and while we're there, then it just makes sense to do it. Okay, well, I will respond to the property owner and just let her know what our plans are and see what her will.
Very good. We'll do the best we can.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Jones? Thank you. You got the AP today. Welcome, Corey. How are you?
Just a couple updates. The first is bus patrol. Bus patrol's been active for approximately a month. Been approximately 45 reported violations. Of those, 30 were validated, resulting in the citations being filed. As of yesterday, and the process is working. And I know we've gotten 0 complaints from anybody that would receive these violations. I think it's pretty clear they get their violation notice.
Good night.
Picture, yeah.
Update on the park cameras. Phase 1 has been completed with cameras going live at Reed and Walk Parks. They're great. So hopefully we'll definitely get benefit moving forward to phase 2. Started Baldwin Park in the near future. As far as staffing is concerned, Officer Bailey has moved to solo patrol duties. He's doing extremely well. Very pleased with how he's doing, as well as how the FTO is handling things. But he's still working hand in hand with Corporal Oliver, and with Officer Bailey moving to the solo patrol duties. That has freed up Officer Patel to go back into the traffic safety role at a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. assignment. And for those that aren't aware, we are dealing with 2 people that are homeless in our township. They've been kind of moving around from one park to the next. The one guy was hanging out at the community center for quite a while.
This the same one from last year?
One is, one's not.
Okay.
He has since moved on. He's over at Rupert Park now.
Okay.
But he's aware that he can't be there at night, so they're kind of moving in and out. We are working with some county agencies to kind of get these guys some help.
Very good.
Thanks for taking on the challenge. It's challenging because I don't know that they want help.
That's the problem.
That is the issue.
Thanks for your efforts and keep up the good work.
Very good. Anything else for Corey? Thanks, sir. All right, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
So far this month, we have 35 permits that were issued. No zoning hearing board applications for June. We actually have a pretty quiet planning commission meeting upcoming. If we have it, we'll be talking about ordinances. We have several ordinances that are a small wireless communication facilities ordinance that we're still working on, and sign ordinance and village commercial ordinance. So there's quite a bit to talk about. Your upcoming meeting in June will be the 110 Christopher Lane conditional use hearing. And the 30 Frets Road waiver land development if they applied for requests from the last meeting. So they should be there. Also a potential for 100 Christopher Lane waiver land development request. That is tentatively on the agenda. That's packing machines, there's a detached garage in that building. We're back and forth with Rick Masta, the engineer, whether or not they're gonna be on the agenda for Waverly Development. I also wanted to talk to you about the potential for a new permit process. And this stems from the gray area from whether or not something is a land development, something that needs to just stay in the building and zoning department for issuance of a permit. I'm calling it an expansion of use permit or expansion of use process, I'll say. So with 30 Frets Road, it was not a land development, it was existing pavement, everything, it was just tanks outside, it's very low level proposal. But it was, in my opinion, something that should not just be kept within the building and zoning department for issuance of a permit, because it was the expansion of that use outdoors, which in my opinion needs to at least be seen by you or and discussed. And so the initial idea is that it would just be presented to you by me, and there would be no application fee or escrow or planning commission or anything like that. It would just be a discussion, and however you would want to handle that, attach conditions or just for informational purposes. But I wanted to bring it up today and just open it up for discussion to see what your thoughts might be.
I know you and I had some discussion on also. Did you have an opportunity to talk to any of the other municipalities about how they handle this type of activity?
So I was able to talk to Mike Brzezinski. And basically the way that they handle this sort of thing is they handle it. They issue the building permit, then grading permit. It's very low. There are some instances in their ordinance that require zoning hearing board approval. That's few and far between. I think they had just a recent application regarding, but that would not be in process. But I reached out to the zoning officer at Limerick, where I do action, and we're kind of playing phone tag, so I haven't heard yet.
How's this gonna be defined in the ordinance? In other words, how is an applicant gonna know how their request is going to be processed through the township?
Okay, so it would come through the building and zoning. The Bible flag. More upper level issue, not just the building.
So it's gonna be at your discretion?
I think it would need to be defined. Yeah, well, that's what I think my suggestion would be the outcome of this might be for, if we have an interest in seeing some process that reflects this, have Mike and Jim and Andy and Joe come up with a definition of what that is, because it seems like there's some gray area between what triggers MPC regulated land development and what is just strictly a building permit on a piece of property. And that gray area, I think, is what's trying to be attempted to be dealt with. And that's the definition you're asking for. We just need that defined.
Right, and I just, Mike gets enough arrows thrown at him. He's gonna be the backstop for all this. I was just hoping that there might be a way that's kind of defined for the applicants so that they don't get
Well,
enough
I
hate
know.
mail.
No, I agree, Keith. I think that we've identified some other inconsistencies or outdated portions of the accessory use section of the ordinance, subsection 15. So we're currently working on trying to iron those out. And I think that this could be lumped in with
Areas together.
because the way that the ordinance reads, it's heavy on the accessory use structure. So accessory uses would only be enforced by way of the structure that's proposed. Like for chickens, it's a chicken coop. For storage, it's a shed or something like that. But there's nothing that we have that's clear about just an accessory use or an expansion of the use with nothing else proposed.
Right.
or something proposed, just not at the level
Yeah, chain link fence, not a building,
of,
right?
right, exactly.
At the same time, how, as a secretary, I said, how often do we see these? I just know in my 3-year tenure, this is the first instance that I've seen. Is it really something that we should continue as is now, or is it something we should, have a discussion now, maybe continue? Should we map out a different kind of plan? Like, how often does this happen that it is?
So, to give an example, I don't have an answer for that specifically, but to give an example of other instances. If you think about a restaurant or cafe that wants to put out tables outside, it might seem very small and very insignificant, and well managed, but then if they wanted to do something more off to the other end of the parking area, and all they're doing is putting tables up, and they have seating for 15 outdoor seats. We don't have a process for that. There's no parking that's required because there are parking based on square footage of the building. And so really no enforcement, nothing to enforce. If the board would like that to stay the same, of course, that's what we'll do. But that's that level of concern that I have from my end, thinking, okay, well, I should at least know about this that it's occurring, like the 31st Road.
And I think that, and I think Mike accurately said it too, we've had a number of things, not all the same, but someone like the pavilion at the church. We've had certain things along that line, and a shed at a commercial building, or, what's the right way to treat those? I think there was some thought that a strict interpretation is they all fall under, MPC definition of land development because they're non-residential uses, but I don't think that's the most accurate reading of that. And I think coordination should to come up with some clarity. So Mike's left in a very difficult situation, I think, with both past practice we've had here and then with some very ambiguous. You can pull this section from the accessory use and it means one thing, but this from the other one and it means something different. And that's not really fair for him or the people coming in to apply. So maybe it's an opportunity to clean that all up a little bit.
And as Chairman Bergman pointed out too, it's a lot. It's a lot on the staff then, 'cause, as Mike said, you'll have to make it out, discuss it again. And I don't know. I don't have a set opinion on this yet. I think it's but of conversation. At the same time, is it a gray area? Because technically it has a process, it's just, we're saying, is it the actual process? Would be a good way to find development or the land development.
But I think as the applicant pointed out, that was here last time. We may think that's the process, that may not be the process, and then we start getting into contested situations from that standpoint. I'd rather avoid that if I could as well.
We are able.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we're committing to anything more than having staff and solicitor's office maybe try to bring some clarity for something to bring back to us. People considering that.
I would be open to hearing it from everybody, before making any kind of decision going forward. But yeah, I'll have a discussion with the proper channels. It's something that I'm honestly going to go look into even more, read it up on this as well. In the meantime,
I'll talk to Jimmy and
I also, at the same time as the last person that we mentioned too, there was a process that we really were following. Because they could contest it, but technically the process was written. Again, that'd be something Andy would say, but I don't see a contest for that. I don't know.
And you and I differ on this, I know, but I'm of the mindset, I'd like to have a relatively straightforward process for what would be people investing in the community that doesn't have to, that's appropriately scaled for what they're trying to do. If it is fully a full-blown land development, we need to go through the full-blown land development process. We also have a number of things, particularly with reinvestment into some of the buildings along Main Street, some of the other areas that these structures have been here, they're there, and it's really someone trying to modify that. And does that really trigger a full-blown land development? I could be wrong, and I could be in a minority, and I'd be perfectly happy to be there to sit on that, but I would like to investigate if there's an appropriate path that would make that appropriately reviewed by the township, but also a path that's appropriate for the people investing their money into this project. So, and you could say that is already there, but I would like to see if there's maybe a little more simplistic path. Because I know in conversations with Mike my goal isn't to put more discretion on Mike, it's to try to give him, I think, a clearer understanding of what is. There's a lot of gray area right now, and it's trying to define that gray area a little bit more black and white for him. It does, yeah.
All right, do you have clear direction then?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, very good.
Thank you.
Anything else, sir? Good, sir.
Nope, that is everything.
Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item of the manager's report is the adoption proclamation designating May 24th, 2027. I'm sorry, May 24th through 27th, 2023 as the Asian Parliament.
We have a motion to adopt the annual Country Fair Days proclamation.
Do we have, how many years is it? We're just not bothered.
Seconds. Avoid controversy.
I'll make it go through. I did.
All right, moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye. Yeah.
Okay.
Aye. Aye. Those against, say nay. Ayes have it.
It is a little less fun bringing it up now. Because I like to see him score him further on.
Yeah, you make us have explode. All right, next up.
Yes, next on the agenda is discussion of the new borrowing environment. Jamie Slackinger from PFM Financial Advisors is here to discuss where the bond market is, interest rates and so forth, and how they kind of are converging at this point.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see everyone. It's been a number of years. So the last time we did finance was 21, did it virtually. Good to see you. So obviously, completely different role that we live in today than we did a couple years or even last decade. Talking to Joe over the last 6 months, 8 months, I know you guys have been considering various alternatives. I think maybe the scope is changing a little bit and you're getting some potential cost back over the next couple of months. So really the purpose for this discussion is really to talk about kind of three things: strategy, interest rates, and tax law. So all really fun topics before 8 o'clock in the morning, but I think very important because it is not something that we've done or thought about previously. It's always been rates are really low, let's refinance, don't need to think about anything else. Well, here we have a really different concept right now because one, what the Federal Reserve has done over the last 6-9 months is completely changed the market from the interest rate side on the reinvestment alternatives for local governments. So talking to Joe, it sounds like you guys are in the process of maybe thinking about your opportunities for your cash reserves, where you are hoping to get higher rates. Well, just to give you an idea, when the Fed has raised rates, it has impacted the short-term market, generally speaking. Long-term rates are higher than they were a couple years ago, but they're still relatively low. And that's what's an interesting dynamic right now. So short-term interest rates on the reinvestment side right now are at 5%. You can, that is not that long ago when you said you got 0.5%, you were really, really happy, let alone 2 basis points who people were getting for a while. So getting 5% of your money really changes the thought process on how I am recommending things for my clients, because it really makes a lot of sense to do things a little different way. So between the concept of new money is number one, and then second thing we're going to talk about is some existing debt related to some of your Del Val debt. So all of those things come together on how you want to appropriate and think about your cash. So let's just turn to the next page, just page 2. Again, a lot of graphs in the next 3 or 4 pages, so I'll try not to kill you here. But bottom section of this graph, I like to highlight. We're generally pretty flat right now on the 10-year interest rate. So yeah, the all-time low was 1%. As you guys know, it was a bank loan for around 1% about a couple years ago. But right now we're somewhere in the kind of the 2.3% range for 10 years. Frankly, if you went out 2 years, you're higher than that. So we're in what is called an inverted yield curve right now, which has only happened a couple of times in the last 15, 20 years, which makes this, again, this time a little bit more interesting than normal. So longer term rates are actually lower than shorter term rates, which is interesting. And 1 and 2, whether you do a 5-year financing or a 10-year financing or even a 15-year financing, those rates are all relatively the same right now. So very, very unique dynamic. And when, again, last point, just to drive it home, the top box with that kind of gray area,
if you see the blue column, that's the short-term rate. So the 1-year rate is 3%. And the 9-year, 10-year rate is 2-something%. So that is the concept of an inverted yield curve. Shorter term rates are higher than longer term rates. That is entirely where you will be sitting with your reinvestment of your proceeds of any financing, and also your variable rate debt, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Questions on that? Okay. So 3 pages worth of discussion here, but I'll try to highlight a big picture here. Talk about tax law. So when a municipality like you would consider any financing at all for capital, you have to have reasonable expectations to spend the money within 3 years. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend it within 3 years. You have to reasonably expect to spend it within 3 years. Now, we all have heard and seen that, you know, some municipalities have borrowed money and supply chain slowed things down, or you can't find labor or whatever. Those things kind of come into this conversation for you making a determination of, you know, doing a project. But for purposes of tax law, it's the reasonable expectation to spend it within 3 years. And it's pretty clear based on where you are in your thought process. We think you have some projects here, whether you know how much they are per se, or exactly what those projects will be. I think you have a pretty good idea of what you need to get done, which is, I think, a good starting point here. 2, what we've never talked about before, because it really didn't matter for the last decade, is certain exceptions under the arbitrage rebate rules. So what is arbitrage rebate? So for any time you have borrowed money in the past, if you borrowed at an interest rate on your debt at 2%, and your reinvestment of your bond proceeds, your interest rates, were at 4%, that difference between 2% that you borrowed at and 4% that you earned, you have to pay back the IRS the difference. That's the concept, okay? Well, in the last decade or so, you borrowed at 2% and you earned 0.5% at best. So there was never any thought about how do you manage your arbitrage rebate, because there was no arbitrage rebate. There's no real earnings on your money. Well, that's different now because of the interest rate environment. Now, am I going to say that rates are going to be at 5% for the next 10 years? I certainly hope not. I think they'll come down. You'll see some charts that people say there's probably going to come down over the next year or so, but you know, we'll see where that goes. The concept of this special exceptions is really what I'm trying to talk to a lot of clients about. And if Joe goes to APMN next week, don't go to my panel discussion because I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this. So you're going to hear this all again if you want. So needless to say, the concept here is you have 2 exceptions. There's a spending exception, and then there's a size of the transaction exception. So what does the exception really mean? Well, what the exception means is if you borrow for projects, number one, and it's financing is less than $5 million or $5 million or less, that's the small issuer exemption. And it's a special rule. The second one is if you spend the money really fast, you also fall in that exception. You don't have to do both. You can do one or the other. So for you, I believe, again, this is pure speculation. I think you're going to probably need, depending on what you do, money for between $5 and $15 million. That's probably a good wide range to guess. So the way I've been talking to some clients that have financings that they may consider over the next couple of years is it makes some sense to split these up in multiple transactions for a phasing project. You get seed money for projects to get you started, 1. And 2, you can take advantage of these exceptions that we're talking about here. So conceivably, if you thought about borrowing this calendar year and not doing anything else, new money, no leases or anything else, we'll have to talk about that, and you borrowed $5 million or less, if things stay the same, again, you can borrow at 3, 4%, and you can earn 5%. So everything that you throw in your accounts, you can keep forever. That's your money. Unlike any other time, because of this environment, there's a complete value in doing that. So what that does is that is hedging a portion of your project. It's giving you seed money, 1, and 2, it's allowing you to take advantage of this certain exception. 2, that also allows you to figure out exactly what the final project cost is. And let's just say it turns out to be $13 million. Well, now you do a second transaction in 2024 when you're ready to go, and you know exactly how much the projects are, and you have the balance of the funds locked in. So you have kind of working the yield curve, where you've locked in a portion of your debt, whether it goes up or down, I don't know. The fact that you can earn as much I think you're in a good position there. So this concept, I think, works. Again, it didn't work 2 years ago. I probably would have said, hey, if you're gonna borrow money, let's do a drawdown bank loan, we don't pay interest on that money, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter anymore. But right now, given what we're talking about here, it makes some sense to potentially do 2 transactions to make this work. That's point number 1. What does that mean to you from a dollars and cents standpoint? So I'm going to skip 2 pages and I'll come back because I want to touch on the other topic for today. We go to page 7. How would this work? So this is going to be the chart that has the, just past that, or we're doing that. There's kind of 3 colored sheets here. So we can do this a number of ways. You know, you get really a very good picture. So just to give you an idea, if you look at your general fund debts, okay, you are paying approximately $1.3 million of annual debt service, and it drops off in 2028. So where you are on the yield curve is, not entirely perfect, but the fact that your debt drops off relatively short. When you do new money, the best and most efficient way to do it is doing a wraparound debt service structure. So I think we've done that in the past where conceivably you borrow the funds for how much you need, and then you structure the payments where you essentially pay most of the principal kind of after those payments are being paid. So you really start paying principal in 2028 until you don't need any more money. So the example here is I backed into a $15 million transaction, said, hey, if you guys need $15 million to make this work from the most efficient transaction, you can amortize the debt over 14 years. And the incremental debt service, if you did 2 transactions, it would be about $600,000 of incremental debt service. So that's what you would need to kind of get to in your budget to pay for approximately $15 million worth of projects. Now, if you only need 10, that's a different conversation. Obviously, the borrowing amount would be less. We can structure it a little bit differently, but the concept of a wrap is really what I want you to think about here is you can borrow, keep it relatively short to save on kind of interest expense, and phase in the debt service to kind of provide the lowest overall impact to the taxpayer because of how the structuring works. So it's really just a matter of you would budget instead of $1.3 million, you budget up to $1.9 million if you borrowed up to $15 million. Again, anything less, it would be lower, of course. But I want to at least give you a snapshot of how a structure would look if you did a wrap structure for $15 million. In comparison, I just showed the red column. This is just a traditional level structure, like a home mortgage, 20-year level debt. So in that case, the payment structure would be, you pay principal and interest every year for the next 20 years. But your incremental debt service would be about $1.1 million. So from a budgetary standpoint, you guys would have to come up with about $2.4 million of total debt service on all of your debt. So mathematically and structurally, doing a wrap is, in my opinion, the best way to do this is you save most on interest expense, and it also kind of helps you from a phase-in standpoint from a debt service.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Jamie, thank you. Can you remind me if the call feature means that investors can demand their principal after 5 years, or if the township can force refunds of principals after 5 years to achieve a lower interest rate on a new issue? I just want to understand the full risk.
It's your option. It's not the bank or the bond people that own the bonds. So conceivably, after 5 years, or you guys can come back and refinance your debt at any time at your option. So actually, let's go back to the previous page just to give you a nice idea. So this is your current debt portfolio. This is the kind of the landscape page. So, although you pay all your debt out of the general fund, it's kind of broken up how we show it between kind of FELP and building. So again, it's about $1.3 million. So when you look at your existing bond issues or and financings, actually these are all bank loans in this case until about, you have a call date on the 21 issue of June 15, 2025. So conceivably, if interest rates are lower around that time, we'll have the option to refinance at that point. More importantly, if the interest rates were higher, then we just leave it alone. So that's actually what we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes with regards to this Del-Val debt. You have some options at this point, just given where the environment is. So more than likely, any transaction that we do, given this size, These would be bank qualified issues. If we broke them up into two phases, it would have a 5-year call provision. So you'd have the option to prepay within 5 years.
Jamie, question for you. If I'm reading this correctly, and I forgot my glasses, that's why I'm holding. it.
No problem. I'm the same way now.
So, one of the things that in looking at these projects, they are gonna be expensive, but we did know that our debt service was gonna be rolling out, obviously. So if we were, and I'm looking at the final column, although I know that's not the exact right way to go, but if I'm reading this correctly. If we did not take any new debt on until we paid off our current debt for the $15 million, we would generally be able to cover that within the current amount of general fund expenditure we have in debt service. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, conceivably, if you waited to do any project.
What did you do? Any borrow?
Any borrowings, right?
Correct.
Any borrowings, and your budgeted payment is $1.3 million. So you could, assuming
You
the
could borrow
rates don't
15
change, you borrow $15 million, it's about the same.
It's about the same amount, so we wouldn't have to adjust any expenditure in our budget. It would just be continuing on at the debt service level that we've currently been living with in the current budget structure.
That's kind of what the wrap sort of does.
It's getting you there, just it's moving a little bit. It's not, I mean, this all makes a lot of sense, but I just wanted to make sure I
That's
was.
exactly right.
Okay,
Yeah, to your point, you guys already have budgeted $1.3 million. You're generating enough, at least enough revenues to cover your debt service at that amount. So that when I keep talking about incremental debt service, that's where what you have to come up with, cover the balances. Exactly. So again, important points here, just to kind of drive home the concepts. Again, based on some assumed interest rates, probably hopefully a little conservative. The average rate on these transactions are probably, under 4%. And again, as we talked about, interest availability of the borrowing of your investment proceeds is fine. So a lot of clients that I have, they say, hey, I've got good reserves here. You want to consider, what you want to do with your cash. Right now, your cash has more value to you than it's ever had. You can earn as much as you want on that because there's no arbitrage restrictions. And in this case, based on what we're talking about here, at least that first step, if you consider that falls under that special category. The second step would not. The value of doing the second step as around a $10 million or less is that would make it bank qualified. You've heard me talk about it over the years. All that means is that you get a little bit lower interest rate because the investors of your bonds or bank loan or whatever it may be gets a special credit from the tax side. So you get lower interest rates, number one, which is good. And two, that allows us to do a call provision of 5 years. In Pennsylvania, PFM's the people that figured this out. We jammed in the concept of 5-year call provisions for the investors. So that's a good thing. You have a bank qualified issue. If you did a non-bank qualified issue, so if you did $15 million, that would be between 8 and 10-year call provision. So good example, today I'm selling bonds for Haverford Township for about $20 million for a library and other things. And they have a 10-year call provision in their bond issue.
So if the investors can demand money, that might be a better option if that was the case.
Well, again, you have the option to refund it. You just have to wait 10 years. That's the bottom line. So that's the bottom line. Yeah, the people that are buying your bonds know they're going to be able to hold on to those for that 5 to 10 year. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
On that, actually too, so fixed rate bonds and again, they seem better for the township, but it could possibly be less attractive to investors. So the question I wanted to ask is under number 12, what the budget under the variable rate?
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation for that? That reading this, I see the thing that we would have to do a little bit directly.
Segue perfectly to this. Yeah, this is where I was heading next. So
but then if you're going off of that, let me get one last question. The dual funding, what is the cost differential? Obviously, there's always a cost when we issue debt. And how long do I have to hold the $5 million to collect arbitrage to outpace the cost of issuing 2 different debt services versus one?
$2 million, give or take. You essentially the cost of doing about a $2 million issue covers the arbitrage that you'll generate.
All right, I'm asking a different way, maybe
You're talking about 2 issues. Right?
Yeah, I'm talking about 2 issues, but if I issue now and I don't really need the money for 3 years, okay, but we pretend, we meet the requirement of that. How many years of arbitrage or how many months of arbitrage cover the difference between the second debt issuance versus only doing it once?
Yeah,
Is
so
it 6 months? Is it a year? Like, how long do I have to let that fester, if you will, to make that a good decision? for
yeah,
us?
it's again, everything is based on draw schedules, right?
Right.
So if you're earning 1% on, $5 million, that adds up. You pretty much covered the incremental debt service you pay. I'm sorry, incremental cost you pay on a second transaction has nothing to do with the underwriter's cost, because $15 million, you're gonna pay one way or the other. So that's fine. It's paying lawyers twice, paying me twice, paying ratings twice. Those incremental amounts, I would say for the second transaction would probably be about, I'd say about $40,000,
Okay.
give or take. So it would probably take 6 months.
Okay.
It's probably a good math.
So if you know you're gonna hold it for longer than 6 months, it makes sense. If it's less than that, it doesn't.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, we can do full math. I'm doing this all.
No, but
it's pretty close.
It's not 2 years, it's not 3 years, it's within that first
It's-
year.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, I did a financing for a $2 million issue
Right.
for similar, and the math worked really, really well. Now, part of what worked for that one was the issuer was thinking about potentially using some reserves to cover the cost of it, and so they kind of double whammy here. A different conversation.
Back to Kevin.
No, obviously, the debt part is very, very important, but look, there's all your debt, but they both have the same concepts here, how you want to think about the interest rate environment for planning purposes. So we can go back to the borrowing, no problem with that, but let's just talk about your Del Val fee. So for some of you who may not have been around for a few years, one of the last transactions that we did, we consolidated and restructured some of your debt to reduce the reduced amount of debt that you had with the Delaware Valley region. For a couple of reasons. One, it provided you very strong interest rates, and it just made it a little less complicated. So we put you in a good position where you have, about 16-ish%, between 16 and 20%, depending on the time of day, of how much debt you have under this program. So the way the program works is you have a fixed rate through a certain point of time. In this case, that fixed rate is going to disappear on June 25th, 2023. And all that happens is at that point is it will revert to their variable rate, okay, if you do nothing. So as we talked about earlier, short-term interest rates are at a unique position where the way the program works is you are paying a variable rate, which is a short-term rate. The current variable rate for Del Val, it moves around, is about 4%, okay? Based on the amortization that's left on this, it's about $1 million after the 25th that you pay a little principal on the 25th. So you have $975,000 left. For the next few years, you have the option at any time, it doesn't have to be on June 25th, it could be a year from now. You can lock in a rate, whatever the market is at that time, or you can leave it variable. So yes, right now, you would actually pay a higher variable rate than you would the fixed rate today, which would be about 3%, about 3.15%. So you know what you pay, but because short-term rates are so high, you're not getting a great bang for your buck on the kind of a relatively short yield curve because it's just what's happened. So it's for you guys, given that you have a good amount of cash reserves, and given where the market is right now, I'm not entirely jumping at locking in the rate today, unless you feel really inclined to just say, you know what, I'm really concerned, let's just lock it up, or rates could go to the ceiling. You always have that option. So my thought is, one, you have an asset liability match. You'd have about $1 million of variable rate debt for a period of time, and you have more than $1 million of variable rate investments, right? So that is going to move with the market. So you have this asset liability match. One. And two, once the world goes back to normal and we see the Fed drop things back to a reasonable manner, is it going to go down to 0.5% or 1%? I don't think so. I've been wrong before, but once it kind of goes back to a normal stage, you'll see the variable rate drop, which is good. You can maintain that. Or now you're shorter on the yield curve. So now that the fixed rate you get would be even lower. So I would hope that you wait a little bit, you pay a little bit higher rate for a period of time, watch the market a little bit, maybe you lock in at a 2% if you wanted to lock in, or you just let it run and maybe you end up just rolling a 1.5% 3.5% variable rate for a period of time. So it's a philosophical question more than anything else. There's no wrong answer, in my opinion. I think you have enough cash to cover any movements up and down, one. You know, you can budget a certain assumption. So if you wanted to budget 3% or 4% or 5%, and I can tell you what that would look like, that's what you put in your budget. And if it comes in a little less, great. If it comes in a little more, you've got enough cash to cover you. Or you just say, you know what, for $1 million, set it and forget it, lock it up for 3%, and we're done. I don't have I'm on both sides on this one. And again, you look at some of these fancy charts that I threw in there, just to give you an idea. Again, these people have been wrong. So don't exactly pull forecast. Yeah, these are forecasts. So we're just pulling right out of you know what various large banks are they're talking about. So they're saying, all right, the 2-year treasury right now, the yield is, as a couple of days ago, is 3.96. It's gonna bump up a little bit. This is on page 4, John. I started making move around all that. Let's go down a little bit farther in this chart. There you go. So yeah, so again, a lot of numbers on this page, but again, each one you kind of look at, besides, relatively short term, maybe that doesn't move, tremendously over the next 6 months or so, but you can see some of the assumptions are, longer term rates are people think they're going to go down. So again, you have a yield curve situation here. We're talking, 2 to 5 years. So if you want to kind of look at that as your baseline for this conversation, it's a 346 on the 5-year, it's a 396 on the 2-year. You can see there's a little bump up, people are expecting, and then a little drop, little drop, little drop, little drop. Again, we're not talking about, hundreds of basis points estimates, but people are predicting something, right? So whatever that means, it means. So there's that page. And then the other one is the second interest rate chart again. Big concept. It's kind of a 10-year treasury versus the Fed funds. Again, all have a very similar path. I mean, they could be wrong and it could be the opposite, or it could just remain flat. I don't know. But what we do know is your amortization is relatively short. It's the final maturity. I guess 3 or 4 years, if I remember correctly.
June of 27.
Yeah. So it's relatively short. All you'll do is get a benefit eventually of the yield curve shortening up, which, you'll have that. And then hopefully you have a benefit of short-term interest rates dropping at some point in time. And, your rates would go lower. So the way I have your debt kind of shown right now, I'm making an assumption that the rate is 3%. Again, it's a little lower than actually what it is currently, even if you fixed it, but I hate to say it's nickels and dimes in the grand scheme of things. It's all said. So yeah, $1.3 million, whether it's 1.305, that's what we're talking about here. So there's no cost to you to locking in. So that's the other thing here. So Delval provides you a resolution. They won't lock in, swap the rate until you sign, execute the document. So on June 25th, the rate goes variable. Okay. If you signed it and said to them today or next meeting, they can lock it up and you'll know what the rate is. Again, give or take around 3%. It's a philosophical conversation. I think you're in a position where if you have $975,000 of a $6 million total outstanding debt with the possibility of borrowing more money in the future, which means your diversification of variable rate debt to total debt is going to be even less than 16%, eventually. So it's not a big number. GFOA, Moody's Investor Service, they wouldn't see this as a problem to have variable, with the understanding that you have flexibility to lock it up anyway. So I wouldn't be worried on that side either. You guys are a AA2 credit. I think we could talk through about the strategy if that's a decision made. So a lot of words there to say, I don't know what you should do, but I think you can look back and be wrong, or you can be right. There's no way to kind of figure this one out perfectly. But I will tell you, we have an anomaly in the market right now on short-term interest rates and the yield curve right now. So you get no benefit for the current rate versus the 4 or 5 year rate versus the 10-year rate. So it'll go back to normal at some point. Good. Sorry, a lot there.
Great.
But yeah, again, 2 years ago, I would have said something completely different, but I think there's some novelty to considering this. I should point out one last thing, which I didn't, on my 3 pages I talked about. If there was any thought, you said, hey, we're gonna spend some cash of ours to cover any cost of the project for any period of time. So if you said, I'm gonna spend $600,000 for something, pretty quickly before you did any financing, what you want to do is establish immediately what is called a reimbursement resolution, which is a 2 or 3 page document. We could, have to be able to prepare one, work with the bond counsel solicitor on that. It essentially says that we as the township are considering doing a financing. You have to kind of give an idea of what that is and what the amount could be. And then conceivably, if in the future you issue tax exempt debt, you can reimburse your general fund with the proceeds of the borrowings of the money that you spend out of your own reserves. So it doesn't require you to do it, it just gives you the flexibility to do it, even tax free.
It helps, that would help with the arbitrage rebate on the first bond. Right?
It's all this is all tax stuff.
Right.
It fits every rule ultimately. So again, the timing of doing a financing is really it's really a question for you guys of when, but the calendar year is what drives all of this. So when you do a financing, there's a reset from bank qualification and the exemptions. So if it's $5 million or less for the small issuer, and it's $10 million for bank qualification. Those are the two things that I think about when I'm thinking about your potential finances. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Thank you,
Jamie. Thanks for coming in at an early hour.
Yes.
We have a puppy, we're up.
You're up.
Very good.
I wish it would have been a better.
20 minutes or two, so it's not.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Joe, maybe if you can just monitor that and there's the work session or something in June, but revisit the variable fixed type thing. I think the other portion of the new financing, at least from my standpoint, I'd want to wait and see the feasibility studies this fall and then talk about what direction we're going, but this might be something to talk about for a next year thing. If there's any leg under anything that we're doing there, or at least the reimbursement resolutions or something along that line. So, thank you.
One last thing. If you can do capitalized interest as well, which for a period of time during construction, you could borrow funds, cover the interest expense while you're constructing, so there's no budgetary impact. You pay for it more, there's more borrowing, but that's a concept too.
The home building industry, I'm very familiar with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Need for executive session? Any further?
Everybody have a nice Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Hope to see everybody
At the fair.